These are my memories of Stuart Kinquist by me, Lance S. Lund. Stuart and I first met in marching band a few days before the start of our first year at Morningside College in August of 1982. He quickly became one of my best friends at Morningside, despite me living on campus and Stuart living at home with his parents in Hinton. It's hard to believe that over 40 years have passed since then. Besides marching band, we had a couple other classes together that year, including chemistry. We would both eventually work for the food service, where we met our good friend Kevin Skolton, where I believe Stuart also first met Robin. When my father suffered a stroke and was unable to drive down to get me at the end of the school year, Stuart invited me to stay at his parents' house for a couple weeks and to store my belongings over the summer. When my younger brother came down to pick me up, the three of us went to a concert featuring the Scorpions and Quiet Riot, a pretty big deal for Sioux City. Stuart's new Morningside connections convinced him to move on campus for his remaining 3 years. While we were never roommates, Stuart always lived a couple doors down in Dimmitt Hall. Dimmitt had just been converted from a women's dorm to a co-ed dorm the first year we lived there, and our floor had the distinction of being the only dry floor on campus. While we largely, but not entirely, respected this distinction, Stuart and I managed to hang out and consume our fair share of adult beverages off campus and in other parts of Dimmitt, particularly in that first year. Some of our dorm pranks included blowing the circuits in the men's room using several blow dryers, then wrapping the toilets with saran wrap. As a former women's dorm, there were no urinals in the men's room, so the door and the toilet seat had been removed from the first stall. As you can imagine, saran-wrapped toilets in the dark made for some amusing encounters. I remember Joel Higgins describing the incident. "I knew something was wrong as soon as I sat down and the old tally wasn't hanging down like it was supposed to." There was a time that a couple big football players made some very rude comments to us after a game. You know, they played the game. We just marched in the band. LOL. I'm sure our butts would have been kicked had we talked back, but we got the last laugh by snapping toothpicks off in the doorknobs so they couldn't get back into the rooms. Stuart has probably long since confessed. If not, I'm doing so now on the behalf of both of us. Sorry. Stuart and I also had fun in lab together. We made squirt guns by overinflating several feet of latex tubing at a time and hanging them out the third-floor windows of the science building, squirting unsuspecting people on the sidewalk below. In our junior year, we learned the name of a contact explosive and thought of a possible way that it might be synthesized. One day, long after lab was over, we worked into the evening and decided to try out the synthesis with a couple of our buddies, Patrick Foster and Bob Conklin. Somewhat to our surprise, a precipitate formed. We filtered the precipitate and placed it above the heating unit to dry out. Now, we didn't exactly think everything through. As it dried, air currents from the heater initiated a reaction. An almost deafening bang. Yep, our synthesis had indeed been successful. This soon led to the realization, uh-oh, we made too much. Not knowing what to do with it, and before the days of capturing hazardous waste was a standard practice in an academic laboratory, we decided to pour most of it down the drain. Little did we realize that the product would dry out in the walls of the pipes. When we went to lab the next week, I clearly recall Dr. Shane turning on the faucet. As the water rushed down the pipes, they began to rattle and bang. No doubt we had been busted. Stuart and I hosted a radio show once a week on KMSC, the college radio station. We each carried a milk crate of our own vinyl albums a few blocks from our dorms up to the third floor of Lewis Hall to play on our show. We had a small but loyal group of listeners that always tuned in and would often make requests. We were fortunate to enjoy much of the same music. The summer after we graduated, we went camping at Gavin's Point Dam near Yankton, South Dakota with Robin and my former spouse, Kim. We had checked out a tent from the college that was made of canvas. A poor choice, it turns out, since a severe storm would roll through later that evening. When Stuart and Robin were assembling the tent, I recall teasing them about waving the aluminum tent poles in the air as thunder and lightning approached. The winds were so strong that we chose to collapse the tent and throw rocks on top so it wouldn't blow away, running to the car to ride out the storm. I recall hearing that we had 70-mile-per-hour winds and 2 to 3 inches of rain. By the time it was all over, everything was soaking wet and it was too late to head home. Stuart and I wound up sleeping back to back, wearing only our tighty-whities in the middle of the tent while Robin and Kim slept on the outside. Oh my, those were the days. The last time I remember meeting up with Stuart and Robin in person was in the early 1990s. We took a day trip up to Itasca State Park, the source of the Mississippi River, near the end of September. Call me nostalgic, but the fall colors that day were the most phenomenal I ever recall seeing. To Robin, Tom and Shirley, Denise and Jasper, I'm so sorry for your loss. I'm happy to be able to call Stuart a friend, and I'm glad Stuart and I were able to reconnect through Facebook a few years back. It sure would have been fun to kick back and reminisce on some of these old stories together. I know Stuart will be greatly missed. Thank you.